Has affluent Birmingham's 20-year-old master plan worked? And if so, is it a formula that other Michigan communities should emulate? That's one of the topics we'll talk about today with Birmingham planner Robert Gibbs. Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. And welcome to Spotlight. Robert Gibbs, one of my guests today on the program. He has been very much involved with the planning of Birmingham and a master plan that goes back 20 years ago. You know, I remember moderating a political candidates forum 20 some odd years ago, and that was one of the hot topics, is the future development of Birmingham. It's been 20 years. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being good and 1 being not so good, how would you rate the success of this plan?
I'd give it a 10. The city has implemented almost the entire plan. We made over 300 recommendations.
Go back and paint a little history, because everybody out there won't remember where you were 20 years ago and why it was important to have a master plan for Birmingham and how controversial it was.
Well, believe it or not, Birmingham was struggling 20 years ago. It had lost 20% of its population. It had lost its 2 department stores, Jacobson's and Crawley's. Retail sales were
My wife and my mother-in-law spent a lot of time at Jacobson,
Retail sales were down 30%, and it had a lot of vacancies. And developers had stopped building, and the developers couldn't make the numbers work to build new construction. So Birmingham was stalled.
Okay. You decided, the powers that be decided something had to be done. How controversial was it trying to move forward with a master plan?
Initially, it was a little controversial. Somerset had announced their expansion, so the city was a little afraid of what would happen with the new Somerset.
Right down the road.
But people knew they needed to change, but nobody really wanted to change, which is very common. And
you had people who obviously had lived in Birmingham for a long period of time. It's one of our most affluent communities in the state of Michigan. And so you have people who have expensive homes and they've invested a lot of money. And you also had a business commercial district that said, hey, we want to be able to prosper too. And sometimes mixing those two don't necessarily go hand in hand.
So the city brought in Andreas Dewani. He's a world-famous planner, and we were part of his planning team. He was the lead planner. And we held what's known as a charrette, a planning charrette. We rented a retail shop downtown, and for a week we brought all of our firms together and did the master plan right on the spot. And we had over 2,500 citizens come to the plan, and every day we presented new options to them.
If there are other communities out there that are facing this issue that all communities at one point or another face, and that is, how do we continue to grow, but at the same time keep the uniqueness of whatever that particular town is, what advice would you give them, and what can they learn from Birmingham's experience?
Well, it's important to know who you are and identify your strengths. Birmingham was a town, and the citizens decided in the planning process to grow to a city. So it's important to know what you want to be. If you're a small town and you want to remain a small town, there's certain planning tools that you can do to keep that small townness. The residents in Birmingham decided overwhelmingly to grow to a city, which called for higher buildings, taller buildings, and more density and and a number of changes.
If there was something that you learned in the last 20 years that you didn't know going in, that you can benefit and others can benefit from now, what would it be?
We were surprised at how important it was to grow. The city zoning only allowed 1.5-story buildings, and we changed the zoning to 5 stories. And that really unleashed a potential demand that I don't think would have ever happened without the master plan. We also had to increase the walkability. Birmingham streets had been made too wide, and it was hard. They had cut themselves off from the neighborhoods. And so the one thing we like to do with cities now is to improve the walkability. We make the streets narrower, we add on-street parking, we widen the sidewalks, and we do a number of things so that people, once they get there, they can walk around in the downtown and not have to drive.
All right, we need to take a little break. When we come back, I want to pick up on this and talk about some of the challenges that Birmingham faces going forward. We'll be right back with Robert Gibbs. Robert Gibbs, one of the main planners of the master plan in Birmingham, my guest today on Spotlight. What are some of the challenges that Birmingham faces going forward?
Right now, there are too many restaurants in downtown, and
Too many restaurants,
and the plan has been too successful. It's attracted a lot of office development, which has put a lot of pressure on parking. So right now, the city is statistically out of parking. The garages are full. When I hire new employees, we can't get permits, monthly permits for the employees anymore, because the garages are at capacity.
So you've been a victim of your own success, so to speak.
We've been more successful than we expected. So the city has to build new parking garages, which is very expensive and very time-consuming.
How do you solve not just that situation, but also the road situation? Because you had to make a lot of changes just over these last 20 years in terms of traffic, cars and trucks.
The city did an extraordinarily good job on calming the traffic. They narrowed Woodward Avenue from 5 lanes to 3 lanes at the north end of town. We got rid of a ring road. There was a ring road, a 4-lane ring road that had really choked off the downtown for the neighborhoods. They narrowed it to 2 lanes. And the city has done a very good job in calming the traffic and widening the sidewalks. Right now, the big hurdle is parking. How do we solve the parking problem? And Birmingham was ahead of its time in the 60s. It built 5 parking garages. It was the only city in southeast Michigan that built so many garages.
So this is sort of like a game of chess in a sense. While you're doing all the things that you feel you need to do out in Birmingham to make it a vibrant city and continue the tradition, the very rich tradition that it has. And I don't mean that in terms of money, I mean just in terms of its history. Other communities around you are doing the same thing, whether it's Royal Oak, or it's Troy, or it's Berkeley and other places. And so you aren't doing this in a vacuum. That has to make it a lot more difficult.
It's very competitive with other cities. Birmingham still is the leading, I think, small city in southeast Michigan, but it constantly has to compete with the private malls and with the other cities. But they've done a good job. It's a good place to go. It's very walkable, has a lot of nice restaurants, a lot of nice shops, and the city has done an excellent job in managing its growth.
If I said 20 years from now, look into that crystal ball, what do you envision for Birmingham?
I think
and other surrounding communities, southeast Michigan, because it's not just Birmingham, you're part of this larger piece of puzzle.
Well, there is a big drive right now with millennials and empty nesters to leave the suburbs and to go into cities. So I think you're going to see the surrounding cities, Royal Oak, Rochester, Troy, be very attractive to millennials and baby boomers that want to live in walkable cities.
Right. And it may be more affordable cities for them than Birmingham.
Birmingham is still going to face growth pressure, and it's either going to have to grow on the east side of Woodward Avenue in what they call the Triangle District, or it's going to have to grow up, and by that I mean taller. Right now it limits its building heights to 5 stories. It's going to have to either go taller downtown or straddle Woodward Avenue and move east.
Birmingham is an older community. What does that mean in terms of just the age of its residents in terms of moving forward?
We think more and more of its residents, it is an older population, and more of its residents are finding they enjoy living in the neighborhoods. They like the walkability. They like not having to have a car and be able to enjoy the amenities downtown. So we think it's very attractive to older populations.
Have you looked at what's going to happen in terms of education in schools? Because certainly we know not too far, Bloomfield, West Bloomfield had to make some tough decisions. They went down to 1 high school when they did have 2 high schools. Population was getting a little older, and they didn't have the base that they had 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. And the trend is for families to be smaller and for there to be less demand for schools.
Yeah.
So that'll probably continue to impact Birmingham schools.
So you got to look at all that.
Yeah.
Let's move this discussion a little bit beyond Birmingham, because I know what you're planning company there. You look at a lot of different things. These days, we hear from the Detroit Regional Chamber, it's about regions versus regions, not cities versus cities. Right. And that's the name of the game now. And so we've got to think regionally more than we think in terms of individual cities. Do you agree or disagree with that? And as you look at Southeast Michigan, are you optimistic in terms of where we're headed?
Yeah, yes, very optimistic. Southeast Michigan, especially downtown Detroit and Midtown, have made extraordinary improvements. And the whole Southeast region's viability really depends on a strong city of Detroit. And fortunately, that's happening very rapidly.
Right, and so you're very supportive of what you see happening downtown, Midtown, and throughout the city of Detroit neighborhoods.
That's right. We can't grow. The Southeast Michigan cannot grow without a strong downtown. Right. And what's good for downtown is good for the suburbs.
Right. Robert Gibbs, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate you. And we'll keep a watch on what's happening in Birmingham and some of our other communities throughout Southeast Michigan.
Thank you for the interview.
It's my pleasure.